and that just as nature fell when man fell, so likewise nature is intended to be restored to its original state of beauty when people are healed from their fallen state of alienation, that all of nature shares in the restoration of communion with our God. Christ's holy cross is a symbol of our salvation, wherein that which is separated is reunited or reconciled. The vertical member of the cross represents the reconciliation between God and man, and the horizontal bar, where Christ is embracing the whole world, symbolizes our reconciliation with our fellow human beings and with the whole natural world. Thus, the cross is an ineffable expression of God's love for his children and for all of his creation, and of the goodness of his original creation. To understand the mystery of the cross is to begin to perceive the theological dimensions of the orthodox attitude of ecological stewardship. Another expression of this transformation of man and nature is the great feast of the Transfiguration of Christ. This feast and its icon affirm that the physical world is good, although fallen, and it is intended to participate in sanctification. Therefore, it is sinful and contrary to God's purposes to abuse and exploit any part of creation, human beings, or nature. Part 3, suggestions for a new ministry of ecological stewardship. In the implementing of the Orthodox Fellowship of the Transfiguration's vision of creating an action-oriented ecological ministry in each parish, I can't emphasize enough that we must first and foremost have an active teaching ministry that will change people's hearts and minds. The result would then be a change of attitudes about their relationship with all the created world and their role in taking responsibility to conserve and protect that same world because of their love for Christ. We must keep in mind that we must effect this change of an individual's inner self in order to change the outer world. To do this, naturally, we must have volunteers in each parish and campus, adapting recommendations to the circumstances of each parish and community. I suggest the following as just a handful of many possible suggestions to transform our parishes, campuses, and homes so that they function in harmony with the created world around us. Establishment of an ecological steward in each parish and campus to gather a team of like-hearted and like-minded volunteers. Having regular meetings of the team to evaluate means of conserving renewable and non-renewable resources of parishes' interior and exterior property and the elimination of toxic materials. Establishment of a parish ecological seminar and workshops for educating parishioners whose objectives are to change individuals' personal attitudes about wasting natural resources, while recognizing that personal habits will change when attitudes change. Emphasis and action points that everyone can enact, such as personal, parish, and community recycling, reducing consumption of power, and the promoting of thrift and frugality both in the parish and at home. Establishment of a parish garden where possible. Have cleanup action days to combat litter and pollution in the entire community. Change the mindset and the pattern of people's daily lives from endless consumerism to communion. For the best developed and presented action list for ecological stewardship, please consult Fred Kruger's handbook, Greening the Orthodox Parish, a Handbook for Christian Ecological Practice. Before concluding, I would like to interject a personal note by mentioning how an ecological conference at St. Tikhon Seminary in April of 2010 was a seminal and transforming experience for many of us who attended, and that illuminated our understanding of the sacredness of creation. It was made clear that the connection of Orthodox theology and the need for both spiritual and practical action to address the needs of preserving and taking personal and corporate responsibility as Orthodox Christians for all creation, including the unborn, that has been entrusted to our care. The following day, some of us were able to participate in a life-changing one-day Christ in the Wilderness guided pilgrimage, which was led by OFT Executive Director Fred Kruger. In conclusion, I wish to emphasize that ecological stewardship within Orthodox Christianity must proceed from a change of attitude toward the universe, recognizing that we are part of nature and that nature is part of us. Therefore, we reject the secular Western view that humans have dominion over nature and are to subjugate nature, which results in the abuse and exploitation of creation and the dehumanization of life in all forms. This prevailing immoral and abhorrent secular worldview with which we are socialized is the polar opposite of the Orthodox reverence for all life. Thank you. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Sounds good. Sure, okay. Sounds good. Do we still have an IT person here? I had a few slides that were on the computer, but I don't know. It's not real important if we can't do it, but it was it was loaded on there. It's it's called DC Talk, original title there. I'm Alf Sievers. I'm at Bucknell University. Let's see here. Yeah, all right. That's okay. Well, if we find it later, we can show it. Holy Trinity Orthodox Monastery and Seminary stands near what some identify as the main headwaters of the Susquehanna River. Jack Brubaker describes the cedar marsh there in this way: a mucky puddle as unremarkable as the Orthodox monastery that soars nearby is unforgettable. One of the American nation's great rivers, he writes, rises beside a cathedral with brilliantly gilded onion-shaped domes, where bearded, black-robed monks go about their monastic duties, just as their brethren do thousands of miles away. Recently, the monastery worked with conservation groups in the Headwaters region to become listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The conservation groups were interested in preserving the integrity of the headwaters against a proposed industrial-scale windmill development that would have changed the landscape horizon, created noise problems, and problems for migratory birds. The cooperation symbolizes how Orthodox communities and Orthodox historical legacy can cooperate with conservation aims on a regional scale. The goal of the conservation groups extended across the headwaters in 2 counties, which serve as the primary origin for the main watershed of the Chesapeake Bay. A dozen years ago, when I moved with my family to teach 4 hours south near the Susquehanna's midpoint, I was looking for ways to engage students with environmental projects in the region. One obstacle was that my primary position is in the English department, although I since have become involved in our environmental studies program. But I was aware of the presence of Holy Trinity at the headwaters and of the historic importance of the watershed in northeastern Pennsylvania to the history of Orthodoxy in America. Together with colleagues, students, and partners in a regional consortium of universities on the Susquehanna, as well as the Conservation Fund and the Chesapeake Conservancy, we began exploring ways together in which cultural preservation and stories could contribute to preservation on the Susquehanna River corridor. This was inspired especially by someone who had lived for a time nearby at St. Tikhon's Monastery and Seminary, namely St. Nikolai Velimirovich, and his writings about story and the word in his Prayers by the Lake. Especially also the project found inspiration from St. Maximus the Confessor's teaching of the Logi of the Logos. And in approaching the idea of a region as a place of stories influenced by Christian teachings, I soon found connected with the literary writings of James Fenimore Cooper and his daughter Susan Fenimore Cooper, 2 19th century Anglican writers with family backgrounds in Quakerism influenced by the Moravian Church. Susan Fenimore Cooper's life of philanthropy, nature writing, and community building at the Susquehanna headwaters near Jordanville reads like the life of a nun in her celibate Christian devotion to service, and her book Rural Hours was one of the few volumes that Henry David Thoreau took with him to his hut at Walden Pond. Another colleague of mine, Catherine Fall, was doing groundbreaking work on the Moravian Christian presence along the Susquehanna in the 18th century, which had influenced the Coopers, and relatively peaceable relations between the Moravians and native peoples there. We also got together with natural history experts and students in the sciences as well, who could tell the stories of the watershed from non-human perspectives. Thus, we began a project called Stories of the Susquehanna Valley, which features a book series. 2 volumes appeared this year on Native Americans in the Valley and on ethnic life in the coal town of Shamokin, Pennsylvania, including an Orthodox Christian community. At the same time, we developed digital mapping research with students that helped convince the National Park Service to designate the entire main corridor of the Susquehanna from Havre to Grace, Maryland to Cooperstown, New York, as part of the Chesapeake National Historic Trail Network. This was done also with considerable help from the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee Confederacy of Native Peoples. The purpose of this project for conservationists has been to highlight the cultural importance of the landscape of the rivers to further conservation efforts, which already have been galvanized by the shaping of the historic corridor and the stories of place and connections to place it helps the region to highlight. This effort is a public-private partnership in which human communities are celebrated and supported amid the river corridor, rather than being removed in an old-fashioned sense of park land clearance. The effort celebrates what the philosopher Roger Scruton in his book Green Philosophy has called ecophilia, or love of home, as a source for environmental preservation and restoration. This relates to Father Sergei Bulgakov's early work on economics, in which he called the orthodox concept of society a household. Ecophilia shares that root term for household with ecology. The latter can be translated from its Greek roots as the story of home, which could be another name, too, for the gospel itself, an infinitely grander and true story of home, but which nonetheless iconographically and symbolically can be reflected on in our church communities and their natural regions. I'd like to end by talking of 2 sources of inspiration related to orthodoxy. The first is thinking about a region in Orthodox terms as a network of stories or logi, more than just a materialistic template or conceptualized object. In this, the project was helped by the ideas advanced by Juliette de Belay in her book, Cosmos, Life, and Liturgy in a Greek Orthodox Village. She describes how life in a Greek village reflected cosmic cycles of symbolism integrally related to Orthodox tradition, liturgy, saints, asceticism, iconography. In modern America, we may want to think of this type of relationship with region. We can focus on greening parishes and seminaries, and we should, but what about greening our regions and the role of universities as well in that? If we do not see ourselves as living in villages in the United States, can we transfer some of that sense of Orthodox community and cosmic symbolism onto a bioregion or watershed to help with ecological preservation and transfiguration of community? These thoughts also helped inspire a new book collection that Bucknell has published, which includes a focus on patristic views of nature and on the Susquehanna. The last source of inspiration I'll share is Susan Cooper. She was not Orthodox, but to read her Christian nature writing and background in Protestant faiths, in certain ways connected with Orthodox perspectives despite real differences, is to appreciate her devotion to founding and leading an orphanage, a hospital, greening her community, and writing influential accounts of nature in the headwaters in the mid-1800s, when contact with Orthodoxy was difficult for Anglo-Americans. Her work involved the Clark Foundation in environmental conservation and social sustainability in the area, and in building a non-smokestack-based economy. The result is seen in the region's well-preserved landscape. In her own way, single and devoting herself to her church in these activities, she was devoted to the mystery behind the experience of headwaters in Christian terms, as are monks and other members of the community at Jordanville in a full Orthodox sense. I'll close with a quote in which she writes on life at the headwaters in the eastern woodlands, and this was a quote found by a student of mine in research that some of the students have done. She writes, "It was the most honor to the prophets who so nobly recorded the greatest of all physical facts, the creation of light. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." And on the page immediately following, while still occupied in recording the grand successive stages of the creation, he condescends to note that out of the earth the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight. This simple phrase, she continues, taken in connection with all its sublime relations of time and place, has a gracious tenderness, a compassionate beneficence of detail, which moves the heart deeply. All the delight which the trees of the wood have afforded to men, independently of their uses, the many peaceful homes they have overshadowed, the many eyes they have gladdened, all the festal joys of the race in which their branches have waved, seem to crowd the mind in one grateful picture, and force from our lips the familiar invocation, "O all ye green things upon earth, bless ye the Lord, praise him, and magnify him forever."
So I just want to begin real quick by apologizing. As a college senior, many things have taken hold of my life in the past 2 weeks. So thank you. So the title that you have for my presentation is actually a bit different from what it's going to be. My title is "The God-Man, Mankind, and Creation, Applying an Orthodox Understanding of the Relationship Between God, Mankind, and the Natural World to Today's Sustainability Efforts." Thank you. The whole earth is a living icon of the face of God. I shall not cease reverencing matter, by which my salvation has been achieved. I cannot help but speak these words with a sense of wonder, even trepidation. We can only imagine how profoundly moved, how aware of God's presence St. John of Damascus was when he spoke them some 1,300 years ago. What does it mean for us, as Orthodox Christians living in the 21st century, to reverence matter, to reverence God's creation, particularly the earth, as a living icon of him? For us, it should come naturally, as our faith rests entirely on the extraordinary premise that God himself became incarnate some 2,000 years ago, fully taking on our humanity while retaining his divinity unconfused and undiminished. Because ours is an embodied God, our faith must, above all else, somehow be an embodied one, in which we hold all created matter to be sacred, formed as it was by the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Since God himself condescended to participate fully in his creation by joining himself into the race of men at a set time and place, what does this say about our view of creation? Particularly, what does this say about our understanding of how mankind fits into the ongoing story of life on this earth and beyond into the very cosmos? It is telling that we worship a triune God in whom there is dynamic yet constant life. We call the second person of the Trinity by one of the most powerful, beautiful names. Christ is to us Theanthropos, the God-man. Alone of all monotheistic faiths, we believe our God walked this earth as a man for a finite time, during which he gazed at the trees and mountains and streams, which he created out of nothing, during which he ate, thirsted, and tired. Yet somehow he remained fully God. Think on the simplicity, yet also the profound wonder of belief in such a God. I'm sure it's always been self-evident to all of you here, as it has been to me, that we have an innate natural responsibility to this earth as stewards and caretakers of all God's creation. Yet how are we to apply and live out this vocation practically in our day-to-day lives, in our parishes, and in our corporate life as members of the body of Christ? True to our Orthodox understanding of the relationship between God and man, between husbands and wives, parents and children, and truly between all people, we are called to view our responsibility to this earth as a sacramental understanding, marked by gratitude to God for his bounty and a sincere desire to conserve his creation unto the ages. As His All Holiness the Ecumenical Patriarch has stated so beautifully, everything that lives and breathes is sacred and beautiful in the eyes of God. The whole world is a sacrament. The entire created cosmos is a burning bush of God's created energies, and humankind stands as a priest before the altar of creation, as both microcosm and mediator. Such is the true nature of things, or as an Orthodox hymn describes it, the truth of things, if only we have the eyes of faith to see it. Now, I'm a student of history, which I suppose is itself a science in some ways. And while I have taken several courses on environmental sustainability, I cannot and do not claim to be any kind of expert on the subject. But I would say that, speaking then as a novice in this field, I would like to touch very briefly on a scientific subject of decidedly amateur interest, but one which I think serves as a relevant example for how our emerging understanding of much of the natural world reflects, even without us being aware of it, the profoundly sacramental worldview to which our faith calls us. My example is an August interview from this year conducted by a woman named Aviva Hope Rutkin, a Boston-based science reporter who writes for MIT's Technology Review. She talked with Dr. Loy Marino, who is a research associate with the Smithsonian Institution, about Dr. Marino's groundbreaking research on orca whales, popularly known as killer whales. In her interview, Dr. Marino elaborated on some of her recent work, which has shed extraordinary new light on the sophistication of orcas' brains. Her research revealed that orcas have a profound capacity beyond what we had previously understood for self-awareness, social cohesiveness, emotional intelligence, trauma processing and tool-making skills, understanding of symbolic language, and also depth of memory. Given our worldview, what can we learn as we continue to discern more about the unexpected brilliance of this particular species in God's creation? I hope that this brief example illustrates my point that the more we continue to learn about other created life, especially our fellow mammals, the more aware of God's presence, dynamic life, and glory we become, even without consciously realizing it. In discussing how we as Orthodox Christians are to care for God's creation, what we continue to learn about such extraordinary creatures seems profoundly relevant on a scientific, societal, and also a theological level. So much laudable work has been done, and so much continues to be done at interjurisdictional levels to integrate sustainable development and ecological stewardship into Orthodox parish and diocesan life. As a student, what I see as the principal obstacle to greater student participation is often just simply a lack of awareness among many young people of many of the initiatives that have already been taking place. Among my Orthodox friends, there is a deep sense of love and appreciation for the person of His All Holiness, and most are very much aware and proud of the title that he has affectionately earned for his efforts, that of Green Patriarch. But how many young Orthodox in parishes across the country are aware of the finer details of his engagement, or the years of planning and vision that have gone into so many international symposia, high-level hierarchical conferences, and bilateral meetings with heads of state? In this increasingly plugged-in age of instant communication, in which pretty much my entire generation communicates by Facebook, Twitter, and email, one thing that strikes me as having a fundamental importance is finding a way to archive and communicate the history of Orthodoxy's leading engagement in environmental stewardship, as well as all ongoing efforts and the latest relevant developments. Unless we develop a means of engaging young people in a way that is easily accessible to them, then perhaps the impact and perceived relevance of these efforts on the lives of Orthodox youth will not be as high as it ought to be. Social media outreach will be crucial to all future efforts, from the parish level all the way up to interjurisdictional symposia and conferences. I would humbly suggest the creation, which Andrew just touched on briefly, of a common online resource where all the important developments and the history of Orthodox environmental engagement are publicly accessible, but especially accessible to parishes. From the addresses and initiatives of His All Holiness, to important multilateral agreements and interjurisdictional church statements, to collaborative local and state partnerships between parishes and businesses, all of these valuable contributions and resources should be accessible from one common website. I know the fellowship has done so much and continues to do so much in trying to synthesize a lot of the materials already out there. But the easier it is for young people to have online access to this extraordinary wealth of materials, the easier it will be for many of us to begin to educate ourselves and then begin to get involved. I would also suggest the identification in every jurisdiction on a diocesan level of student leaders who can meet with hierarchs and lay leaders to discuss plans for a greater integration of sustainability efforts into all dioceses nationwide, especially locally, by reaching out to parishes, Orthodox business leaders, and community leaders, as well as local university chapters of the Nationwide Orthodox Christian Fellowship, or OCF. The eventual establishment of an interjurisdictional student leaders sustainability conference or a standing committee under the Assembly of Canonical Bishops would be something to perhaps consider in the future, entirely on an as-needed basis.